Don't talk to me in a fucking foreign language, you stupid ugly cow.
Mate, will you stop?
I will carry on as long as I can with this ugly black bastard.
Keep your voice down. Stop.
Kenneth, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I've seen it before. I've seen it more than once, and it just makes me very sad to see another human being treat another human being in that way.
It, a bit like Kenneth said, it makes me sad, and actually I feel quite angry about it, because this is 2018, and we're still experiencing that.
Yvonne, tell us your reaction.
I mean, watching it, I did feel a bit of shock. And I think about maybe my mother being in a similar situation and how I would react at the time in terms of the wording he used. I mean, clearly she was speaking English, but, you know, there was a phrase there, stop speaking a foreign language to me. You know, these are all things that point to a clear bias. Yeah. Being displayed, a clear prejudice.
But she's 77 years old. That's part of the shock of the whole thing, is that at this point, I mean, what's happened is the red mist has come down, basically, and all his inhibitions have seemingly have gone. Yeah. I'm sure he didn't get on a plane thinking, I hope I don't sit next to someone who's black, but then the red mist descends and it all kicks off. Yeah. I mean, do you see that? Do you think this is symptomatic of the society that we live in today? Do you think that he's not alone and that this is something that can happen when people get extraordinarily upset?
Well, I think he's not alone, but, you know, I think most of us, I don't think there's a human being alive who's not been upset, who's not felt angry with either themselves or the people around them or the world for some reason. We all have to deal with that. Some people, I think, perhaps are able to deal with it better than others. I'm not making an excuse for that, but I think what we've seen more recently is that I think if people in positions of authority and power use a certain kind of language, then I think it gives license to other people to think that is acceptable. Absolutely. And I feel that's what we've seen, both in this country and in America, particularly.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because it does feel as though we're moving into a new paradigm almost, in which this insular us first, we first, me first mentality is gaining momentum. Do you think the rise of populist far-right movements is something that we need to be concerned about?
I think we do. I mean, if anyone who's read, you know, some of the current and past statements of Brazil's new president, his statements on human rights, on democracy, on gender, on LGBT. I mean, it's shocking. I think we do have to be very worried.
But is Brazil an exception, do you think, or do you think that this is something?
Brazil, America, it's happening in Europe. I mean, I think we do have to be concerned, and I think there has to be resistance. And I think we have to not be afraid to speak up and say, no, we don't think that is acceptable. I mean, I thought it was President Trump had the audacity to suggest that the press should actually consider setting the right tone. He's been setting the tone since before he was elected.
Well, this is in the wake of the Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh attacks.
And was trying to suggest that it was the press's fault for not setting the right tone. I think that is, the man is deluded.
So do you think we live in dangerous times? Do you think that the world is becoming, from the perspective of race and bigotry, and it's not just about race, is it? This is something that concerns anyone who doesn't look like what you might describe as the majority. I think the world is becoming a more dangerous place.
I wouldn't say so, no. I think that people are in a place where they're more free to express their views. But we're also in a place where we can take action, where we can speak out. You can have conversations, open conversations about how you feel about certain issues and be able to address them. I think the forum is there. It's just maybe getting the platform where it's necessary. So I think in certain instances that you've mentioned, it's about the people having an opportunity to speak out and say what they view as the right way to move forward, and because people have views.
I would say I do feel that there is a cause for concern, because I think it's more than words. It's when those words lead to actions, and I think we're seeing that in so many instances.
We feel in some ways as though the world has moved on from when we were kids. I feel. I mean, I grew up in Ghana. When I was 16, I came to this country, and when I came here, I was the only black guy in my school. I remember walking into my first lesson, and the biology teacher said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Dawid Konaté Hulu." And he said, "Well, that's ridiculous. We're going to call you Joe." And they literally called me Joe for the rest. But now, if someone says Joe, I turn around. I still, 40 odd years later. Wow. Is that we're not going to call you. We're not going to call you that. We're going to call you Joe. And we feel as though we've moved on from that. But in many ways, the world is a more complex place. Yetunde, what are your thoughts?
I think that people have always had opinion. The world is more complex, but what makes the sound bites dangerous is because of the opportunity with technology and social media. And when somebody's popular and they say something that's negative, it just spreads around like wildfire, and nobody's really looking underneath the surface. I think the world has moved on and also not moved on, because I remember years and years and years and years ago when one of my first jobs was as head of equal opportunities for an organization. And I remember being Nigerian, and I was the only black female in the company, so I was made head of equal opportunities. And at that time, we had the Opportunity 2000, which was like the equivalent of the 30% Club. You had the Black National Mentoring Consortium. I think we have Black National Mentoring Consortium today. And in a lot of ways, things haven't moved on at all. And that's what makes me a little bit sad. I think that people are speaking up more. It's great to be here having this kind of conversation. But in so many ways, things haven't moved on. I remember being head of equal opportunities, and I was reporting at the time in that company to the global head of management development, who had appointed me to be head of equal opportunities. And then one evening in his office, we were having a chat, and I said, well, you know, it's such a shame that people don't see that we are all equal. And he leant across the table and said to me, well, Yetunde, do you really think that black people are equal to us white people? I wasn't sure whether this was a joke or something.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I experienced that. And even today, I think things haven't changed. We were talking about that gentleman on Ryanair. Last year in September, I was traveling to Edinburgh. And at Heathrow Airport, the gentleman looking at the tickets turned around to me and said, I did have my British passport. And he turned around and said to me, do you speak English? So of course I said, no, I don't. And all the red faces on the line behind me. So in some ways, yes, we've moved forward, because what I'm really proud about is that particularly black people, we're having a stronger voice, we're being proud for who we are, we're having experiences like this. That's awesome. But on the other hand, I think that there's not enough progress. It's not moving fast enough.
And let's talk a little bit about multicultural Britain, which we all pride ourselves on. We watched the 2012 Olympic Games with Jessica Ennis-Hill, and huge success. And you look now, maybe the greatest F1 driver perhaps ever, Lewis Hamilton. He's a black guy.
Yeah, that's good.
And yet at the same time, we feel like we're not making progress. So we are, and we are not. But Yvonne, multicultural Britain. I mean, what is in your experience today? Do you think do you experience bias or racism? Do you think in any aspect of your life?
I think it's something that I'm very aware of. So there isn't a place that I go to where I'd say I don't remember that I'm black. I may be the only black person around. There may be others around, but you always know, you're always aware. And that can be because of different things. Maybe it's because something that I'm feeling within myself, or because it's something that somebody has done. You know, maybe the way, as you're saying, the way somebody's looked at you in a place, the way you were treated maybe when you were trying to buy something in a store. You know, there's instances where I grew up part of my time in Edinburgh, and there's instances where some of the kids would say the N-word to me and sort of giggle and run away. That's not something that I'd experienced here in London when I was growing up here. Or, you know, maybe you'd go to one of the slightly more expensive stores and try to buy something, and the person would sort of look at you like, what are you doing here? You can't manage this. So I'd say, you know, I'm always aware of it, and there are times when you notice a bias, but I think I've trained myself to not see it that way.
So how do you look at it now then? How does, when you're looking at a situation, because it's easy to see the gremlins everywhere and to over catastrophize situations,
Exactly.
I guess, and to kind of put one colour into the mix at every opportunity. But how do you manage not to do that and to try to have a balanced approach?
I think it's just looking at a situation and seeing it for what it is. It's potentially somebody being quite ignorant, someone being quite rude. You know, because there's things, everybody's got a certain bias about anything. It doesn't have to be just race. It might be just because of the shoes someone's wearing. But you're not going to overtly saying, oh, you know, you're wearing this type of shoes, so you're this type of person. But it would take somebody who's ignorant and rude to do that. And so I think that's how I view it. And I sort of think, okay, you can either become one with the situation or you can part with it and leave gracefully. And that's what I choose to do quite often.
I'd love to get a little bit of your stories, where you grew up, life in your childhood and moving into your teens. I mean, maybe just tell us a little bit about what life was like as you grew up.
Well, I have something in common with Yvonne, that I spent time in Scotland in my childhood. I was actually born in Croydon, but when I was 9.5 weeks old, we moved up to Glasgow. So I spent my first years in Glasgow, and my first memories were in Glasgow. So I felt like a Glaswegian. I felt like a Scot, and I must have been quite,
Great
you know,
accent.
I'm not saying there weren't other people like me of mixed race or around, but, you know, and I was where I started doing ballet at the age of 5, and I was the only boy, and I suspect I was only the only mixed race, you know, Anglo-Nigerian boy probably in Scotland at that time, doing classical ballet classes. At the end, at 7.5, we moved to Cambridge, and apparently it took me 6 months to lose my Glaswegian accent. The last 2 words to go were "we" and "hoose." But as you see, I like to think I can slip back into it. You know, I'm probably a Glaswegian say, "No, mate, that's no Glasgow patter," but I can hear it. I don't have any problem understanding it. But I've been in London since I was 18, so I've been in London 40 years. I'm a Londoner, in it. So that's my mix, and I guess part of my identity is the fact that we're talking about multiculturalism. I feel that I am multicultured in the sense that culture is not just about skin color, and it's not even just about, you know, your DNA or your blood. It's about how you live your life. It's where you inhabit. It's where you go to school. It's the conversations you have. It's everything that makes up your own personal culture. And I don't know how much this would have been my nature anyway, but I think the fact that I have grown up, you know, conscious of my Yoruba culture, my Nigerian culture, and growing up in Britain, I think I'm always aware that there's more than one story. There's more than one side. And if I can tell you one other anecdote, which is the first time I went to Nigeria when I was about 20, I had these two, you know, parallel experiences. On the one hand, you know, in Yoruba people, you will know that there's a word oyinbo, which really is used just to, you know, tell you that someone is other, you know, from Europe or white. But it's quite a catch-all phrase, and it's not actually, I don't think, usually used with stigma. It's just a descriptor. So I heard that in relation to me, you know, arriving in Nigeria for the first time. At the same time, I have a large family. I'm the eldest of my siblings. I had a different mother to them. But out of all my siblings, everyone else says I'm the one that looks perhaps most like my late dad. And so I had the uncanny experience of when I arrived, of people close to the family and distant family members who I'd not met before, coming up to me for the first time and going, we know you. We know who you are. Yes, you're sure. You know, so they recognise me. And at the same time as they were embracing me, I was also having to contend with the label, something that labelled me other. And these two things were just like this. And I couldn't change it. I couldn't be angry about it. I couldn't be upset about it. I just observed it. And I think that's what I do a lot of the time. I think the one thing you can't do is change how other people see you, or change the labels that they will throw at you, or put on you, or the thoughts they have in their head. You can't change them. I think the only thing you can do, you can have a conversation with them, you can maybe try and educate them and point them in another direction and say when you feel uncomfortable about something. But beyond that, I think it's about finding a place of comfort within yourself. A place of equanimity where you go, okay, I'm secure in who I am. I know my history, I know my identity, But that's also, I would say, that's evolving. We evolve through life. Our sense of who we are and identity doesn't stay static. It grows and changes and refines, and some things become more prominent.
And Yetunde, thank you, Kenneth. But Yetunde, do you have that same grounding, that same sense of who you are, that identity? Would you say, I am who I am?
Yes, absolutely. But it didn't come immediately, because when I was growing up, I always had a desire and this pressure to want to be part of the crowd. I had a high inclusive need. I wanted to be included. I felt insecure. I was always seeking approval. But now, in my 50s, I know who I am. I know what I'm about. I have a deep sense of joy inside of me.
And how did
I
that
have a sense
happen
of
then?
purpose.
How did you move from being...
I think, well, first of all, I came to a place where I began to appreciate that if I don't accept me for who I am, how on earth can I expect somebody else to accept me? And if I'm in a place where I can accept myself for all of who I am, all my warts and all, then I can create an environment for others to feel just as comfortable around me.
And did either of you have a role model as you grew up? Did that play any part in the process?
Well, my father was my first role model. You know, you were the eldest of your siblings. I am the youngest of my siblings, the youngest of 5 children. My father was the very first Nigerian professor of chemistry. He was a high achiever. And I can remember he had all this. He was also the first Nigerian to get a first-class honours in chemistry at the University of Leicester, and he did a PhD at the University of London and Oxford. So he was my role model, and he had a very high ethic about education. And all this international, this white Oyinbo, university professors used to come and visit, and they'd wear their, their sandals with white socks and Farah trousers, and then
Farah trousers.
with the trousers just dangling above the ankles. And then I came to England for the very first time to boarding school, and so I had an impression of white people that was a certain way, and then I came to England. My brother picked me up from Gatwick. We went to Victoria, and I saw this. He seemed like 7 foot tall Mohican guy. He had a Mohican haircut. He was wearing a skirt, Scottish Doc Martens shoes, and I was holding my brother's hands. And as he walked past me, he winked at me, and I thought, oh my God, where have I come to? Yeah. But ever since then I went to boarding school, and there was only about 4 of us in my class, in my year, who were black. And I tried so hard to fit in, and I was trying with this English accent that didn't work. Hello, how are you? And so on, and people would laugh. The more I tried, the more difficult it was. Hello, and then I'd turn around and speak to my Nigerian friends. How are you? How's things? So I just had this. I didn't have an identity. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to achieve. But then at the age of 17, I remember my school was in Brighton. I was sitting on a ledge, and I was looking out. And I did A-levels, and one of my A-level subjects was religion. And my teacher was one of the most awesome, inspiring women. She was a spinster. And she told me a lot more about Jesus. And then I thought, I want to know him. So at the age of 17, I became a Christian. I gave my life to Christ. But that didn't suddenly get me, hey, I know who I am. So I went through, I could tell you so many stories. I went through so many ups and downs. But it wasn't until my late 40s and I got into my 50s that I began to say, if I don't start accepting me for who I am, boy, I'm not going to get anywhere.
Thank you very much. That's very powerful. Let me just turn to you, Yvonne, and tell us a little bit about your story. Did you have a role model growing up? Was there someone that played a part in your life, or what did it look like?
Yes, I did. I'll say, though, that definitely I'm a born-again Christian as well, and that's something that's played a huge part in terms of my growth in the last 4 years since I moved from Edinburgh to London and started working. And it ties in with my role model as well. So my role model is my mum. Cliche as it is. It's definitely my mum. She's very fiery, she's got a lot of ambition, she's a very hard worker. And these are things that has carried me throughout, primary school, secondary school and university. but you know, there are things with that I found it wasn't enough. You know, I didn't have many other people around me, for example, or I didn't have anyone else around me who was in the financial sector, who worked in an office-based environment, who could tell me what, you know, office politics are, or tell me what it means to be in the environment that I'm currently in. And I think that's something that I've identified is a factor that I've had to deal with. So in terms of my mum, the type of jobs that she'd done, she had been a chambermaid, a care worker, a support worker, cleaner. In terms of levels of seniority, I mean, she had cleaning contracts and things like that, but she's never been, you know, very, very senior in any of the roles that she's been in. And I think I took that into my working life. So as well as being very hardworking, you know, I got to where I want to be and I'm here, and I don't know how to act. You know, I don't know how to speak to people of seniority. I don't know how to chime in meetings. I don't know how to build relationships with people who are much senior than me. You know, I noticed that in every workplace I've been to, I'm great friends with the security guards, the cleaners, the secretaries. I know them all by name. I know their family life. But if you were to ask me about maybe some of my bosses or some of the more senior people in the practices that I've been in, I couldn't tell you.
I really want to get into this because I hear this over and over again. This is something that we constantly hear when we talk to people of color, black people in the industry. And it's not the only minority, but this is something where we hear that. But this is something that we hear frequently. Is I really struggle to find my place. I'm struggling to find my place because I don't see anyone else who looks like me. I can't look up into the organization and see someone who looks anything like me, who's either black or even a black woman in the entire ecosystem, and therefore I'm struggling to find my place. Is that something that either of you have any?
Well, it's interesting. I hear Yvonne's point, and I think maybe that we should come back to that particular thing because I think there's, you know, maybe think about what some of the solutions are. I think when you were asking about role models, I realised that I think my situation was slightly different for two reasons. You know, I think growing up in Glasgow and then Cambridge, for the formative years of my life, I think I wasn't a predominantly white environment. And so I think I suspect I did at some point look for people who looked like me, but in the end, you know, I wanted to become a dancer. So my role model was to look for the best dancer. It didn't actually matter necessarily what colour they were. So when I saw film, and of course we're talking pre-internet days, so you know, you were either seeing them live or perhaps in the cinema when I saw a film of Rudolf Nureyev, the famous Russian ballet dancer, dance. I was like, well, I want to be like him. It didn't matter to me what colour he was. It mattered to me that he was the most phenomenal dancer. So I think, in that sense, I think I perhaps have, maybe unconsciously, it's maybe only later in life that I've thought about the importance of having people who, you know, either for myself or probably now, thinking about the younger generation coming up, of having younger people, seeing people who look like them in key roles and feeling that they have access to them. I do think that's important, but I think I probably found my own way of coping with that. Yeah. Perhaps just because of the area of work I went into.
Yetunde, Yetunde, I mean, you have a background in human resources, yes. and also you have a consultancy that you run, which is all around how do HR departments, how does senior management make themselves culturally fit for purpose, if you like. Yeah. Do you identify with anything that Yvonne has said there about this business of fitting in and and being able to identify with people further up the organisation?
Yes, absolutely. I think actually it's also more complex than that, because when I can relate to what Yvonne is saying, because a lot of people who are black and young black professionals or even ambitious ones, we don't have enough critical mass in organization. And then on top of that, the fact that we're black doesn't mean that we're all the same. And more full people in organization that think a person who's, if I take myself, a woman, 5'2" 3/4 is important, black, Nigerian, well-educated, in HR, and that doesn't mean another person who's like that is exactly the same as me. We have different values. So the aspect of role modeling is important, but what I'm beginning to find is that the role model is more about the kind of individual, regardless of who they are, who operates in accordance with his or her values. And you can relate to that if they do what they say and they say what they mean. Because I've seen black people in senior levels who've been disappointing in my experience. And I've also seen white people and people of different race to me who've been senior and been disappointing. And I've seen the opposite. And in fact, some of the people who've given me the biggest breaks in my life, in my career, have been white, male, middle class, the dominant culture.
Yeah, I completely identify with that. The same thing, the biggest breaks that I've had have come from people further up in the ecosystem who haven't been black, but have been white, but took an interest in me and said, we're going to help you and just show you a little bit about how this system works, what you need in order to, in order to move forward. Kenneth, tell us a little bit about how you think how do we fix the situation? How does someone,
I don't know. You see, when Yvonne was talking, I was saying to myself, well, if you were hearing that, if you were sitting where I am, hearing yourself say that, what would you say back to yourself? About how, you said you're not sure how to talk to people who are senior. Well, they're human beings, like all of the four of us sitting around the table. Yeah. You're very personable, you're very clear, you talk with great clarity. I can't see any reason why you should speak to them any differently to anyone else. And it's brilliant that you... And
yet still it's an issue, right? So
that you know the cleaners and you know the people, because too often I think people who get higher up the organisation, one of the difficulties and challenges and flaws can maybe be is that they lose touch with what's happening lower down. So it's brilliant that you take the time to engage with those people. I think it can be to do with confidence and a sense that you feel you should be at the table.
But how that comes from the table itself, giving you that permission to be part of the gang, part of the tribe, part of the action. And how much of it comes from you, where you have to push yourself into it to make it happen? It feels to me like it's a two-way thing.
I think it comes from both of those things. So that's one thing. So as I said, I've been in the industry for almost 8 years, and it's taken me a good chunk of that to realise that this is where I've been. This is the situation I've seen myself in, and I think you definitely do have to push yourself. So, I mean, for example, I've been in a new role for almost 2 months. And here, I speak to senior people, even if it's just a simple hello, just like you said, they're people just like you, right? And it's about pushing yourself to have that conversation. And also in meetings, recognizing, okay, I haven't said anything, for the last 20 minutes. Let me just pipe up and let people know that I'm here. Obviously have something, intelligent to say, but make yourself known, make yourself be present, because you got through the interview stage just like everyone else. So obviously you've got the credentials to be there, and you've got to push yourself into that role. And I think it also ties in with what you're saying. You do kind of need somebody who's at the table to bring you along. Say to you, identify something in you that's great, which they should see because you got through the interview. And
this interview point is a really important one, because too often I hear people say, I have imposter syndrome. This feels like a thing where it's increasingly a mindset where the person is in the room but feels like they don't really belong. Like, I managed to get in here, I know I passed the interview, I know I undid the exams, whatever it was.
But not be found out.
Let me not be found out. And it's a serious thing, right? Because it holds you back. Yeah. Basically, it's a limiting, it's a self-limiting belief, if you like.
I agree with you. Definitely is, and I have heard that before. I've not heard it called that, so I think that's a great name. But I think that's definitely
now we have syndromes for everything, right? So. You have to be that you weren't too sure about it.
Yeah, now it's got a name.
Now it's a thing, right? It's imposter syndrome.
Clinically treated, hopefully. So I agree with you. A lot of people do identify with this syndrome, and I think it's about recognizing that you are meant to be there, because if you were not, it starts at the basics. I'm not too sure about HR processes, but I'm sure it starts at the basics. People will look at what you can do. If you can't do it, if you're coming for a large investment role and you haven't got experience in that area, you're not going to get through that stage. So you got through there because you're meant to be there on paper, so now be there in spirit and physically.
I think if someone was chairing a meeting, or the more senior person, I think if they are observant, they will notice that there are some people around the table who haven't spoken. You know, and I think a good person can intervene and just say, look, Yvonne, do you have any thoughts? You haven't said anything till now, and I think you can help give permission.
And you know, all too often it doesn't happen.
And I think that's important, because sometimes it's that quiet person who's going to come up with, you know, the brilliant idea or the thing that everyone needs to hear, and they felt maybe because it's a little bit from the left field, or and they're going, will they accept it? You know, and actually just being given that permission is important. I mean, I want to take that opportunity. I went to a conference a few years ago. It was on London 2030, looking at the future opportunities and challenges. On one panel there was a guy, I think he was the head of Citizens UK. He made this. He said this comment that I've never forgotten. He talked about the importance of being at the table, and he said, the danger is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu being talked about.
That's good. I like that.
And so I found myself, when I was doing some public speaking recently, referring to that, and then I showed the people I was speaking to 3 pictures, and the first one was from the Conference of Berlin in 1884-85, when the 14 European nations and America sat around the table and they carved up the whole of the African continent into the nations we see today and the straight lines. And the fact is there were no Africans around that table, and of the people who sat around that table, only 2 had even been to the continent. If you fast forward to the second picture I showed them was a screenshot of BBC Radio 4 in our time, veteran broadcaster Lord Melvyn Bragg discussing the Berlin Conference. And the programme was great and the debate was good, but when I scrolled down to the comments, someone had said, why were there no people of African descent in your panel? And it hit me, and I thought, look, here we are, what, 120 or so years later, how, you know, and the people who are most affected by those decisions are still not at the table. And the third picture I showed them was something, well, maybe that actually brought that into the current day, which was in 2000. Well, that was 2013. In 2009, I was lucky enough to be included in something called the Power List, the list of an annual list of African and Afro-Caribbean, influential Afro-Caribbean Britons. And we ended up in a reception at number 10 Downing Street. I think Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. And something very spontaneous happened as we were leaving, which is we went into the cabinet room. And we sat down at the table. And we looked around at each other, and there was a picture taken. It actually ended up in The Guardian. One of the people sitting around the table was a Guardian journalist. You know, there was Diane Abbott, and there were lots of familiar faces there. And but I remember us saying to ourselves at the time, this won't have happened before in the history of this room, to have this particular number and array of brown and black faces sitting at this seat of power. And we were also musing that, you know, it might not happen again in our lifetime. And so it leaves me now thinking, you know, especially with my new role at the Africa Centre, I think, what do we do? You know, do we, and when I say we, I mean, do we wait for other people to invite us to the table? Do we carry on knocking on the door or waiting, and, you know, or I don't think we do. I think we have our own, we have our own tables, we have our own conversations, and we move things forward.
Which is, you know, yeah, absolutely.
And then if other people want to come to our table, we'll welcome them.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, we don't have a huge amount of time left, but Yetunde, I'd love to hear a little bit very quickly about the Enjoyable Life program that you've got, the event that you've got coming up in December the 7th. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's going to be inspirational. It's going to help people who are...
and you're going to be speaking there too, telling your story.
Yeah, indeed.
Well,
a little bit.
I just want, just 1 minute before we go on to that, I just wanted to say that the reason why sometimes this not being feeling able to be at the table, I don't think it's just an exclusive thing to us as black people. I think it could happen to anybody. You know, there's a verse that says, as you think you are, or as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. So we've got to start seeing ourselves as deserving that place at the table. And what I'm loving, one of the advantages of social media, is that there's a growing, swelling movement about, we don't want to see any panels, as in no all-male panels at conferences, not all one-color at conferences. So people who are putting on events are beginning to think about, okay, how do we look at this? And the whole aspect of role models, I think now all of us around this table should become role models. We are, and we should take that very seriously. So now when I'm invited to chair conferences, when I'm invited to speak as a black female, as a female, I do it. I take it seriously and I make the time. Because people see you and they say, well, if she can do that, so can we. And that brings me back to the Enjoyable Life series on the 7th of December. I run a community organization. It's called the Enjoyable Life Series. I run it like a not-for-profit. And the whole idea is to give people of whatever background, community, education, business, the tools so that if you apply them in your life, whether it's insights, ways of working, ways of doing things, if you apply them in your life, it will make your life that more enjoyable. And when you have that joy inside of you, you can be more life-proof, more resilient. And What's Your Story is an opportunity for people, leaders at all levels, to show the world themselves as who they are. Not what they do, not what they have, but who they are as people. And to tell a personal story. Times when they've been stuck, when they faced challenges, when they found it hard to let go, when they've dealt with grief, all sorts of things that people like you and me can face every day.
Well, I think, yeah, we all need to be there. And,
Absolutely.
And to get there is...
And together, it's at the Passage Charity at Victoria. It's on the 7th of December.
Online, can we check it out?
You can check it out online. If you go to my website, yetundehoffman.com, go to the conferences to 2018, you'll find out more information on all the speakers, and you can book. Register now. It's going to be awesome. Thanks, Dawood, for giving me a chance to talk about it.
Look, it's been great having you on the show. So, Kenneth Olumuyiwa Bob, CBE, thank you so much for joining us. Yetunde Hoffman, thank you very much indeed. And Yvonne Yeboah as well. Wonderful. Thank you so much indeed. And it's been great. Thank you.
Great.